Hey knitters, so when I sat down to record today's episode, I had truly intended to film a video all about altering both necklines and sleeve circumferences on a top-down circular yoke sweater. But after I got through filming the piece about the collar, I realized the video was going to get a little bit too long. So I'm trying to make you feel better by showing you some of my moo. I am going to create a separate the two videos. So this week is going to be all about modifying the collar circumference of a sweater. And next week, I'm not going to make you wait 2 weeks, will be about modifying the circumference of sleeves without affecting the circumference of your sweater size. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hey, welcome to episode 4 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and I'm a tech editor. In last week's video, we talked about modifying the upper sleeve circumference for drop shoulder style sweaters, worked bottom up. And we started there because it generally requires the least amount of math to modify the upper sleeve circumference. But it was just the jumping off point for a series of videos where I'm talking all about modifying sweater patterns without impacting the circumference of the body. So today we're jumping in with talking about the collar circumference and the sleeve circumference of top-down style or top-down circular yoke style sweaters. This is a question that I see a lot of, and I thought it would be fun to jump right in with the collar. So just a little bit about circular yoke style sweaters. They can be worked bottom up or top down. They're very common for both color work or textural patterns, or even just a standard stockinette style sweater, like the Louisa that I'm wearing today, which is available now. And they're very common because they're really fun to knit. You do basically everything is right side work. You're picking up the sleeves from live stitches around the armholes without having to do any seaming. So they're really a lot of fun to work, very accessible. They can be worked bottom up, but I think it's probably a little less common. But if there is some interest in learning more about bottom up style, I'm certainly happy to talk about that in a future video. So unlike a drop shoulder style sweater where your yoke stays the same width all the way through the body, a circular style sweater like this is kind of a cone. So it's got a fixed circumference at the neckline with a targeted number of stitches increased down the yoke to a fixed number of stitches at the separation, basically the underarm where you separate the body from the sleeves. So adding and subtracting stitches throughout the yoke can have some pretty significant impacts on the sizing of the body versus the sizing of the sleeve. So it's important we understand that, or like how to add stitches to make sure that you're changing one without changing the other. So just like last week's video or 2 weeks ago video, I've created a schematic for you that I'm going to be referencing throughout the video. I'll pop it up on the video or on the screen here for just a minute so you can take a look at it. And I've also taken the extra step of creating kind of a mini pattern for you. It's not an entire pattern. It doesn't have gauge, or no, it has gauge, but it doesn't have needle sizes or anything. But it's just to walk you through some really common steps of top-down circular yoke style sweaters so that you can see what I'm talking about, where we need to make changes in our stitch counts to make sure that the body is still the correct size when we're all done. So there is links to both the schematic and a little PDF of this mini pattern in the description below the video. We're going to be looking at size 2. And the question that I see a lot is how can I make the collar bigger or smaller without changing the body size that I want to make? So the first option, and you're probably going to roll your eyes, it's really simple. Go up a needle size or go down a needle size. So very commonly in patterns you will see one needle specified for the body and sleeves of a sweater, and it'll be sort of like the main fabric needle or the larger needle, And a second smaller needle will be specified for any kind of ribbing or edging. And it's usually 1 or 2 sizes smaller than the main fabric needle because you want your edges to sort of pull in a little bit. Ribbing is quite stretchy. If you knit it at the same gauge as your yoke, you might find it gapey or too large. So often we specify a needle size down. If you want your collar size to be smaller without doing any math, go down another needle size or 2. You can absolutely do that without having to change your stitch counts. And conversely, if you want it to be larger, go up a needle size. You could use your main fabric size needle to make the collar so it is a little bit wider without having to do any math. So yeah, I know I know that sounds really logical, but sometimes you just need permission, right? You just need to hear it. So that's the easiest solution. The con with that method, of course, though, is that you don't necessarily know what your gauge will be on that fabric, so a ribbed fabric with that larger or smaller needle size, so you can't guarantee what your collar circumference will be. So it's easy, it can work, but the results can be unpredictable. Hey, just a quick aside here before we move on to option 2 for adjusting the collar using math. I wanted to address an email that I received from one of the viewers asking about adjusting the width of collars for boat neck style sweaters. And this is relevant only from the frame that last week we talked about drop shoulder style sweaters, and those very often have boat neck necklines. So to adjust the circumference of a boat neck neckline, which is basically just a row of stitches that are just cast off straight across. There's no drop to them. It's just a straight line. To make it larger or smaller, you will seam more or fewer stitches at your shoulders to impact the width of your neckline. It's fairly straightforward. So if you've got a pattern that says your front neckline or your neckline width for a boat neck sweater is 12 inches and you want it to be smaller, for your size, you will simply bind off or seam more shoulder stitches to make the space between the seamed shoulder edges narrower. The caveat with that, though, is because there's no shaping like a crew neck, you're bound to the width of those stitches on the front and back. They will be the same width, and there's no horizontal distance to really give you any play. So whatever the width is, you double it to get the circumference. So if your shoulder, or pardon me, your neckline width is 12 inches, your circumference that you get to stick your head through is 24 inches. You double it. That sounds really large, but but it can happen. I just have very narrow shoulders, and like from point to point, I'm 12 inches. So anyway, that's an aside. So the rule of thumb that, or the, yeah, my best practice, my opinion, is that the narrowest a boat neck neckline should be is about 9 inches, especially if you don't have any kind of stretchy bind off edge. 18 inches, right? So double the width of your neckline is about the minimum circumference that an adult head can sort of squeeze through without not being able to put the sweater on at all. For example, when I design like a crew neck sweater or a circular yoke sweater, I like to make sure that the back neck width is around 7 inches, just so it sits nice and close to the base of my neck. But if I were to knit a boat neck style neckline that was only 7 inches wide, the opening would only be opening, like it's just kind of an envelope style, would only be 14 inches. And there's no way I would get that over my head. So just remember that if you're going to modify the neckline width of a boat neck sweater, I don't recommend going less than 9 inches wide or 18 inches in circumference, just to make sure it can get over your head. Okay, let's go back to our regularly scheduled program. So let's talk about option 2, which is math, and it's a lot more predictable. We can use the original needle size specified for that particular fabric. So If they say to use a smaller needle size for your collar, you will use that. But what we're going to do is look at adapting the collar sizes in the pattern, so collar sizes that are already provided, but then making sure we get down to the size of sweater that we want to knit. So the first step is going to be choosing the size. When I pull up the schematic that I told you about earlier, and we're just going to pretend we're knitting size 2. So size 2 has a 19-inch circumference collar and a 40-inch bust circumference. These are completely made up numbers for the purposes of the example, but that's where we're starting off as our baseline. Let's say you wanted a larger collar circumference relative to the same 40-inch finished circumference of the body of the sweater. So you want to make the collar larger without making the body larger. The easiest thing to do is look at the stitch counts for the collar one size larger, which conveniently in this pattern is size 3, which has a 20-inch neck circumference. And we're going to pretend that that fulfills your desires. You want a 20-inch circumference collar, not a 19-inch circumference collar, but you want the 40-inch chest circumference. Okay, so the math doesn't come in right away. The first thing you're going to do is simply cast on for that size 3 collar, which if you look at the mini pattern is 88 stitches, and you're going to work all of the ribbing as per the size 3 using the smaller needles, and then you'll have a 20-inch circumference collar. Okay, now most patterns, and in the sample that I've provided for you, most will have the short rows worked immediately after the collar is done. So what I recommend you do is, if you have cast on for a size 3 collar, if the short rows are worked immediately, work the short rows as per size 3. You don't need to change anything. Short rows are generally based on a percentage of the circumference of the size of collar that you've cast on. So you want to work the short rows as per the collar size that you cast on. If the short rows are not immediately after the collar, we'll come back to that. Let's keep moving with this and then we'll come back to that. So once the collar is done for size 3, the short rows are done for size 3. Now we have to start looking at the math for getting back on track to be knitting your size 2 sweater. So the first thing, we're going to go back to the pattern really quickly. The first thing you want to do is look at your next shaping round. So in a circular yoke style sweater, you can see we've got an increase round right here, right below the collar. We've got one here, and these are generally fairly evenly spaced down the yoke depth. Every designer has a slightly different method or ratio of shaping them or spacing them. But basically what you want to do is, between the collar and that very first round of yoke increase stitches is where you want to adjust your math to make sure that you get back on track with size 2 right away. To use the example from the pattern that I've given you, we're going to be looking at the difference in stitch counts between our collar stitches, which is 88 stitches, and the target stitch count at the end of yoke increase number 1. So that's the way to get back on track. Can you see my brain working on that? We have to go from the collar that we cast on at a size 3 to the stitch counts for size 2 by the time we're done that first yoke increase round. So instead of going from the size 2 collar of 84 stitches up to 119 stitches, which is the target stitch count after yoke increase number 1, we're going to increase fewer stitches to go from 88 stitches in our collar to 119. So the same stitch count at the end of yoke increase number 1 for size 2. So that math is fairly straightforward, right? We need to know that the differential between our target stitches, which is 119, from our existing stitches, which is 88, and this works out to 31 stitches instead of 35, which is what the shaping round for size 2 calls for in the pattern. So now we know that we have to increase 31 stitches on that first yoke increase round. The method that I like to use, and it's possible there are other methods, I don't know. This is the method that I was taught when I took a grading course. You take the total number of stitches that you have on your needle, which is 88, and divide it by the total number of stitches that you need to increase to get to your target. So, and that's 31 stitches. So you're going to divide 88 by 31. And I've done this math already for you. It is 2.84. So what that tells me is I need to work and increase every 2.84 stitches to reach my target of 119 stitches over the existing 88. Obviously we can't knit 0.84 of a stitch, so we need to round up that number and round down that number to find out our two intervals of shaping. So 2.84 rounded up is 3, 2.84 rounded down is 2. So we need to work our shaping at intervals of either 2 stitches or 3 stitches across the round to get to our 119 stitches. So I've got all this math in the description below, but if you want to take some notes as we go along, what we need to do once we know that we need to shape at 2 stitches and 3 stitches is find out how many times we have to work 2 interval shaping versus how many times we need to work 3 interval shaping. So the formula for that is 2x plus 3y equals your existing stitches. So 2x plus 3y equals 88, and x plus y has to equal 31, which is the total number of stitches that you increase to reach our target count. So lots of fun math there. Basically what it works out to is we need to increase, do a K2 make one left 5 times and a K3 make one left 26 times. So the 5 times that we have to work the 2 plus the 26 times we have to work the 3 stitch spacing works out to be 31. So how you space that out across the stitches that you have is kind of up to you. Because we're not working a raglan style sweater where we're stuck having our increases either in the front only or on the sleeves only, we're just working them across the round. You could simply work K2, make one left 5 times at the very start of your round, and then work K3, make one left 26 times to the end of the round. It's totally fine to do it that way because you're still going to be distributing the stitches all the way across the round. You're not separating them out into a specific segment of the sweater just yet. Alternatively, you could break it out to be something like K3, make one left 13 times, so half the total number. K2 5 times, and then K3 make one left the remaining 13 times to the end of the round. And all that does is centers your smaller interval in the center and your larger interval across the remainder, depending on where your beginning of round is. So all I wanted to say is space out those shapes, or space out the interval of shaping however you'd like across the round. It won't truly impact the shape of your yoke too much. Okay, so now if you had gone the opposite way and you had cast on 80 stitches for a smaller collar than your size 2 sweater, so you use the collar size for size 1, you would do exactly the same steps, but you would have more stitches to increase. So instead of increasing 31 stitches for to go from a size 3 to a size 2, you'll have to increase 39 stitches to go from a size 1 to a size 2. The long and the short of it, though, is that you want to try and get your stitch counts back on track as quickly as you can so that when you work the remainder of the yoke, you don't have to make any more modifications. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So from this point forward, from that first yoke increase round that you've got your stitches back on track, assuming you plan to make no other modifications to your sweater, that's it. You're done. Your collar is larger or smaller as you desire. Your sweater is back on track for size 2, and you can knit the rest of the sweater exactly as it's written. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Of course, if you want to modify for larger upper sleeve circumferences, which we're going to get to, we'll have to look at making some adjustments, but it's not going to be till closer to the end of the yoke. So you can knit the majority of the yoke exactly as it's written once your stitches are back on track for the target stitch count. Okay, so I did want to touch on what if the short rows are not right at the collar. So there's a couple of different options. One is if you've got a sweater like this, that's the yoke style, and it's color work or textural pattern, and the designer has decided to put the short rows below the chart, which can sometimes happen. Your stitch count is already back on track, so you don't have to worry about modifications there. Likewise, if your short rows are worked sort of between increase rounds, a really good example of that would be the striped sweater by Andrea Mowry. She has her short rows sort of interspersed between the stripes. As long as you are back on track for your stitch count for the size that you're trying to make by that first increase round, it's okay. Your short rows will be reflected in that already. So basically, the rule of thumb for this is just to get your stitch counts back on track as quickly as you can, and the best place to do that is immediately following the collar and before you get past the first yoke increase round. Okay, so as you saw at the top of this video, I had planned to make this a one-stop video for collars and sleeve circumferences, but I felt like our math was getting a little bit carried away, and I didn't want to give you any more in one video. So I think what I'm going to do is cut this video in half here, and next Wednesday I'm going to release the second half where we talk about modifying upper sleeve circumferences of a top-down yoke style sweater without impacting the body circumference. I just think it's easier to take this information in smaller bites. To make sure you get notifications about those upcoming episodes, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. You'll get a little notification if you click the bell, and then you'll know exactly when it's released. Alternatively, you can subscribe to my newsletter, and you will get a little notification in your inbox every Wednesday when a new episode has gone live. Thank you so much for checking in today, and thank you for understanding, hopefully you understand, about why we're cutting today's video in half. I want to try and give you useful information that you can put into practice really quickly without you getting overwhelmed. If you have questions about anything that was discussed in today's video about modifying the collar, either up or down for a circular yoke sweater, please feel free to leave a question in the comments section below. Or if you have other questions that you want to have covered in future videos, please feel free to submit the form for discussion idea topics. So thank you again for being here today. I look forward to seeing you next week when we finish the tutorial about how to modify sleeve circumferences on top-down yoke style sweaters. Happy knitting!